What's going on, 7th graders? This is Mr. Williams, and today we're talking about central ideas and key details. Let's dive in. Our focus for the lesson are these three things. We're going to use key details to determine the central idea. We're then going to determine the difference between stated and implied. And lastly, we're going to figure out and work through and RQ question number 1, which is defining and describing the weather phenomenon. Here's some things that you're going to need for this lesson. You're of course going to need a pen and pencil. You're then going to need the text, Thunderstorm Basics from our last lesson. And then lastly, of course, the RQ number 1 worksheet. So here's some words that you're going to need to know for this lesson. First word, phenomenon, which is an observable fact or event. Second word is convection, the transfer of heat by circulation or movement of the heated parts of a liquid or gas. The last word is anvil, the flat cloud formation at the top of a storm. So these three words are like weather words that you're going to need to know as you read the text so that you understand what's going on. So as you look at your RQ number 1 worksheet, it's going to ask you a question. The question is, what is a weather phenomenon? And they want you to describe it and define it. So weather phenomena can be defined as natural events that occur as a result of one or a combination of the water cycle, pressure systems, and Coriolis effect. For example, you have thunderstorms, hurricanes, windstorms, heat waves, tornadoes, and many more. So in other words, in weather phenomena, one thing can happen, or they can have multiple different things that cause these natural events here. So let's take a look at RQ number 1. Now this RQ number 1 is called stages of development. You have your before, during, and after. Now we're not going to really focus on this particular one today, but you will see it in the near future. This identification RQ is really just a timeline, okay? So it really just describes the before, like I said, the during, and the after of your weather event. Here is another organizer that you may see in the near future as well. This one is a project organizer. The question that it poses to you is, what does this weather phenomenon look like? Here's some more questions it poses. What does it feel like? And lastly, how does it sound? All right, so these are things that you're going to research at your leisure. And lastly, we have this project organizer here, which focuses on the causes of the phenomenon and why. It also focuses on text evidence. So it's important that we always remember to cite those sources, all right? Now, before we start getting into organizing our thoughts with that organizer we talked about in the previous slide, let's talk about stated versus implied. What does that mean? Let's take a look. Here's an example of something that is stated straight from the text, right? Hint, I have quotation marks, which means it's a direct quote, all right? A thunderstorm is classified as severe when it contains one or more of the following: hail, 1 inch or greater, winds gusting in excess of 50 knots, which is 57.5 miles per hour, or a tornado. Now, this sentence is a strong statement. Of course, as I mentioned, it has quotations, which means it is a direct stated quote, all right? Let's take a look at something that is implied straight from the text. Here's an example. Thunderstorms are most likely in the spring and summer months and during the afternoon and evening hours, but they can occur year-round and at all hours. So this sentence implies that it doesn't thunderstorm that much throughout the year. Now, implications mean simply that it's not directly stated, all right? So we can still understand what the author is trying to say without them having to actually say it. So looking back at these two words here in comparison with each other, stated is more so of something that is straight from the text and is directly quoted, all right? Implied is more about the language. You have to read between the lines because the author probably isn't going to exactly say it the way you want him to. So let's take a look at this project organizer that we're going to use for today's lesson. Again, we're focusing on the cause of the type of phenomenon and why. So in order to actually figure out these causes, we need to find some key details from the text, and I mean straight from the text, so that we can answer this question. Now, the question is, what causes this weather phenomenon? So let's look at these two paragraphs that I specifically chose to answer this question. Let's take a read. The sun heats the surface of the earth, which warms the air above it. If this warm surface air is forced to rise, hills or mountains or areas where warm, cold, or wet, dry air bump together can cause rising motion. It will continue to rise as long as it weighs less and stays warmer than the air around it. As the air rises, it transfers heat from the surface of the earth to the upper levels of the atmosphere, which is the process of convection. There's that word. The water vapor it contains begins to cool, releases the heat, condenses, and forms a cloud. The cloud eventually grows upward into areas where the temperature is below freezing. So this answer here pretty much answers our question of what causes this weather phenomenon, all right? So these paragraphs that I selected pretty much state the cause of weather phenomenon. So guys, I don't want you to be confused in thinking that this is a weather lesson. This is a language arts lesson, which I'm here to teach you how to record certain information. So on this organizer is where you're going to record what you learned and what you found. So let's take a look at how I demonstrated myself, recording information. So in order to answer this question, what causes this type of phenomenon, we have to first put in what is the phenomenon. The phenomenon is, of course, thunderstorms. That is the title of our text, Thunderstorm Basics. It's all about thunderstorms. So in order to answer the question now, let's put it in the sentence. What causes this type of weather phenomenon? What causes this type of thunderstorm? We have moisture, which the Y for moisture is rising unstable air. We then have surface air rises. And the Y for that is that it weighs less and is warmer than air around it. So last but not least, we have convection. There's that word again. And why do we have convection? Because it warms the air of the atmosphere, all right? So I pulled out all of this straight from our text, okay? Notice I could have pulled out many different other pieces of information. However, I pulled out those key details that helped me to answer this question, all right? So notice this TB here. It stands for the title of our article, which is Thunderstorm Basics, all right? Now, I could have put the page number if we were reading a book or a story or anything like that, or article, a really big article. But because this article is on the website and it's really small, we just want to use the title, all right? So guys, let's continue. Let's look at another example from the text that will help us answer the question, what causes this type of phenomenon and why? What does a thunderstorm look like? Thunderstorms can look like tall heads of cauliflower, or they can have anvils. An anvil is the flat cloud formation at the top of the storm. An anvil forms when the updraft, warm air rising, has reached a point where the surrounding air is about the same temperature or even warmer. The cloud growth abruptly stops and flattens to take the shape of an anvil. So now that we've read this little excerpt from the text, let's take a look and underline some key details to help us answer the question, what forms thunderstorms? Okay, so I underlined an anvil forms. Now, an anvil is clearly the flat cloud formation at the top of the storm. So this tells me that this is one of the reasons a thunderstorm is birthed. When we look at the why, we then look at this. When the updraft, warm air rising, which we talked about in our last slide, has reached a point where the surrounding air is about the same temperature or even warmer. So the updraft is the reason why the anvil forms. So let's put it in our organizer. We have anvil clouds can form, and then we have our Y, which is updraft reaches where surrounding air is the same or a warmer temperature, all right? Don't forget to reference the text, which is Thunderstorm Basics, and we have to put that here in this column, all right? So guys, I know it seems like we have finished our organizer. However, this lesson is still based on us finding key details. So we're gonna have you try. So guys, what I want you to do now is I want you to pause that video, all right? I want you to look through these paragraphs here, and I want you to identify different ways that thunderstorms form, okay? We'll see what you came up with in just a second. So remember earlier in the video, we talked about the before, during, and after worksheet. So that's something that this can actually help you with. Now that's not my main focus, so let's talk about what we're really here to talk about, which is identifying key details. So here's what I found throughout the text, and you may have found this as well, okay? So it talked about moisture, rising, unstable air. It also talked about lots of collisions building up through lightning, and then it gives some more information about lightning and how lightning affects others as well. So let's wrap this thing up, all right? So today we identified the main idea using key details. We then were able to decipher what is stated versus what is implied. And lastly, we were able to describe and define weather phenomenon. So here are the next steps for you. You're going to read about weather phenomenon, and this is something that you're going to research as well. You're then going to find information that addresses the research questions and then add it to your organizer. And lastly, you're going to keep a list of questions that you may want to find more information about that will help you to become an expert on your topic. Well, that about sums everything up. I'm Mr. Williams from Southern Guilford, and I'll see you next time.